my essential question is, what does being green really mean? So to narrow down my research, I came up with 4 sub-essential questions. What is the impact of plastic packaging for all of the things we buy and use? What is the impact of bottled water? And how do packaging materials affect our health? Oh, and also, what can we do to become more green with respect to packaging? So what is the impact of plastic packaging for all of the things we buy and use? So I figured I would start off with where does plastic come from and how it's made, because many people are very unaware of this process. So first, the petroleum is drilled and transported to a refinery, and there it's refined into ethane, propane, and hundreds of other petro products that we use, and of course fuel for your car. And then the ethane and propane are sort of cracked using a high temperature furnace, and they're turned into propylene and ethylene. And then it's combined with a catalyst, which basically just increases the rate of chemical reaction. And that is turned into like a sort of powdered material, and which is called the polymer. And the polymer is just long chains of carbon atoms. And then additives are blended in with this polymer, and the additives are really where the problem lies when it comes to plastic, because they're just chemicals that can harm organisms and ecosystems as well as humans. And then this polymer is melted and it's cooled, and that's the plastic, and then it's cut into little pellets called nurdles, but I'll talk about that later. And the pellets are shipped to customers, and the customers can make whatever plastic product they like, for example, a plastic bottle. So plastic ends up in 2 places, the first one being a landfill, and we put about 58 million tons of plastic into a landfill each year, and if it doesn't make it to a landfill, it goes to an ocean. And there was a 1975 study that showed, they figured out that about 8 million pounds of plastic is being dumped into the ocean each year. And today, the world's fleet is tossing about 639,000 plastic containers each day. And due to this, many organisms are dying in the North Pacific, and I'll elaborate more on the North Pacific a little bit later. But they're dying due to ingested ocean litter, such as bottle caps, cigarette lighters, and tampon applicators. Or they're getting tangled up in nylon netting, and nylon is just synthetic plastic fibers, and they don't decompose. So once they're abandoned from the boat, they just keep on killing organisms. And a statistic that I found from Conservation Magazine that I thought was very eye-opening, it said that 40% of the sea is covered in garbage. That means that 25% of the earth is a toilet that never flushes. And when I say garbage, I mean mostly broken down pieces of trash. Oops. And this is a picture of a sea turtle eating a plastic bag. They mistake plastic bags, especially the clear ones, as jellyfish. So they eat the plastic bag and then ultimately die. And this is a picture of an albatross carcass. And an albatross is just a big bird, if you didn't know. And as you can see, it's decomposing with a bunch of plastic that was inside of it, and it probably ate this plastic thinking it was food, and now is paying the ultimate price. And in addition to highly visible plastic garbage such as this, there is the not-so-obvious plastic pollution, which are nurdles, and I kind of went over that before. They're the pre-production plastic pellets. They're really small. They're about 5 millimeters in diameter, and they're used for the manufacturing of like hundreds of thousands of products that we use. And there are about 20,000 to 25,000 of them in just 1 pound, so they're really small. So there's about 1 billion of them in the rail cars, which is how they're transported. So during the transfer from the car to factory, many escape because they're light enough to blow around in the wind. And they ultimately make it to the sea, and as a result, they represent about 10% of litter on beaches worldwide. And another category of plastics in our surface water is called microplastic pollution. And this occurs from polyester and acrylic clothing. So when they're washed, as a load of laundry is being washed, the tiny fibers of plastic are detaching from these types of materials, and they're washed out with the wastewater. And a single garment can produce about 1,900 or more fibers per garment. And the problem with this is that the microplastic debris is accumulating in marine habitat, such as the marine mud and sand. Okay, so plastic is thrown into, washed into, and blown into the ocean. But once it gets there, it doesn't just sink to the bottom. It floats and gets broken up. And a lot of this plastic trash ends up in ocean gyres. And an ocean gyre is basically just a large-scale circular feature made up of ocean currents that spiral around a central point. So the most notorious of the gyres is the North Pacific Gyre. It's also known as the North Pacific Garbage Patch. And in the North Pacific Garbage Patch, there's an area that is twice the size of Texas, with about 3 million tons of plastic in it, 80% of which was originally discarded on land. And in this area, there is a ratio of plastic to plankton 60 to 1. So the fish mistake the plastic particles as food because there's just so many of them. And the plastic photodegrades, meaning it breaks down when exposed to sunlight, much easier in the ocean because it's an open area, so it has more, it's constantly exposed to the sun. So the polymers that I talked about earlier, they cross-link. So about two strands of the polymers, they come together, and this makes the plastic brittle and break down. So the North Pacific Garbage Patch is basically just a soup of small, broken down pieces of plastic. And one would think that this is better for the environment because it's not the previous huge container that organisms are getting stuck in and dying in, but it's actually worse because the chemicals and the additives are more readily consumed by organisms such as fish, and so the fish eat these chemicals and then we eat the fish. And the plastic that doesn't remain in the ocean washes up on our shores. So 20% of beach detritus is plastic, and plastic doesn't biodegrade, so the waves hitting the beach erode the plastic down just as it would the rocks, turning the plastic into sand-sized particles. And basically what this means is these plastic particles are mixing with our entire topsoil of the earth, they're mixing with our biosphere, and we're basically just turning into a plastic planet. So how do we solve this issue? Many people think the answer is through recycling. However, only 3 to 5% of all plastics made can be recycled in any way. And this is due to plastic having a very low melting point. So the plastics cannot be heated up enough to remove the previous contaminants. And if they are heated up too much, they will release deadly vapors such as dioxin, which is a known carcinogen. A carcinogen basically just means it's cancer-causing. So this often prevents recycling. And only recycling numbers 1 and 2 that are stamped on the bottom of the bottle or whatever plastic don't have much of an aftermarket value because the plastic bottle will not be made into another plastic bottle because of the previous contents. So this plastic bottle will be made into like synthetic fibers for carpets and fleece and stuff like that. So my next essential question is, what is the impact of bottled water? And I found that by 2030, 2/3 of the world will be without clean drinking water, and that is regardless of where you live. And what this means is we will be more dependent on bottled water than ever, which in turn will be more dependent on fossil fuels and petroleum, which is already an issue. And the manufacturing of bottled water uses about 714 million gallons of oil each year. And 80% of the PET, or polyethylene terephthalate, which is the recycling number 1, like with water bottles, manufactured in the United States, goes to 3 companies. Poland Springs, which is actually Nestle, Dasani, which is Coke, and then Aquafina, which is Pepsi. So imagine if we didn't use water bottles, we would be making 80% less PET than we currently are. So if we compare bottled water to tap. There was a study done in 2007 of this, and it showed that bottled water uses about 58 million barrels of oil to clean, fill, seal, and label the bottles, and that doesn't include making the plastic. And as a nation, we drink about 34.2 billion liters of bottled water each year, and that comes down to about 114 liters per person. And this is about $190 a year per person for just drinking bottled water. And if you compare it to tap, the energy needed to provide 114 liters of water per person per year of tap water is only equivalent to about 29,000 barrels of oil versus the 58 million for bottled water. And it's only about 5 times a year, which is a huge difference. So my last sub-essential question is how do packaging materials affect our health? And I wanted to start off with a case study done in a town called Corpus Christi, Texas, and there is a petrochemical plant called Flint Hills, and they produce paraxylene, and paraxylene is a